I knew something was wrong long before I knew who was behind it. The first thing that showed up in my yard was half a foam mattress, soaked from an overnight rainstorm, leaning against the flower bed my late wife had planted years ago. A week later, it was ripped contractor bags, then broken shelving, then greasy fast food boxes that smelled like they had been baking in the summer sun for days. At first, I figured someone had dumped it by mistake. By the third month, I realized some mistakes don't happen on the exact same corner of your lawn every Tuesday morning. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I live on a quiet street just outside Cedar Hollow, Ohio, where most people wave when they drive by and arguments usually end over coffee instead of lawyers. My place isn't fancy. White siding that's needed paint for about 2 years. A front porch I rebuilt myself after a windstorm, and red geraniums lining the walkway because my wife always said a house should smile before the owner does. Ever since she passed away, watering those flowers every other morning became less about gardening and more about keeping one promise I could still keep. Across from me sat 3 rental houses owned by the same woman, although you wouldn't have known it unless you looked up the county records. Her name was Vanessa Holloway. Mid-50s, expensive sunglasses no matter the weather, silver Mercedes SUV that somehow always looked freshly detailed. She never stayed more than 20 minutes. She'd show up on the first of every month, collect rent from 3 different front doors, wave at nobody, then disappear before anyone could corner her about repairs, broken gutters, cracked sidewalks, leaking roofs. Those problems belonged to somebody else. That's how she liked it. Her tenants weren't bad people. Most of them were working families trying to get by, and over time, I'd gotten to know a few. Louise worked nights at the distribution center. Megan was raising 2 little boys after her divorce. Old Mr. Carter spent half his afternoons sitting on his porch feeding squirrels peanuts. Good people, but good people can follow bad instructions without realizing it. One Tuesday morning, I walked outside carrying my coffee and found an old recliner sitting halfway onto my grass. I dragged it back toward the rental driveway, figuring somebody had left it in the wrong spot. Less than an hour later, it was back. That's when I noticed Megan walking outside with another garbage bag. "Morning," I called. She smiled awkwardly. "Sorry about the mess. Vanessa told us to leave oversized trash at the edge of the lot until pickup." I looked at where she was pointing. "You mean my lot?" She frowned, genuinely confused. "Wait, this isn't part of the rental property?" I almost laughed because her face told me everything. She honestly had no idea. Someone had simply pointed toward my yard months earlier, and everyone after that kept doing the same thing. It wasn't laziness. It was bad information passed from tenant to tenant, but that bad information had started somewhere, and I had a pretty good idea where. I spent the next few weeks documenting everything. Every mattress, every pile of drywall, every garbage bag leaking mystery liquid into my grass. My phone filled with time-stamped photos. 40, 50. Eventually more than I cared to count. One afternoon, my neighbor Harold wandered over while I was cleaning another stain near the curb. He watched me in silence before saying, "You know she's counting on you." "Counting on me?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "People like that build businesses around decent folks avoiding confrontation." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected, because he was right. I hated conflict. Always had. I was the guy who'd rather fix the fence than argue about who broke it. So I tried the polite route first. I wrote Vanessa a certified letter, nothing emotional, just photos, dates, and a respectful request asking her to stop directing tenants to use my property as a dumping area. 2 weeks passed. Silence. I mailed another certified letter. This one included copies of cleanup receipts and reminded her that continued dumping could become a civil matter if necessary. She signed for that one too. Still nothing. Not a phone call. Not an email. Not even an apology through her property manager. It was as if I didn't exist. And honestly, that stung more than the garbage itself. Because when someone ignores you that completely, they're making a statement. They're saying your time isn't valuable. Your property isn't important. Your voice doesn't matter. I remember standing on my porch one evening watching her silver Mercedes glide down the street after another rent collection. She never even looked toward my house. She drove away with the same confidence she'd carried for months. Maybe years, convinced she'd already won a game I didn't even know we were playing. I had no idea then that the real game hadn't started yet, because a week later, while watching a garbage truck squeeze through the narrow asphalt lane behind my property, one simple question crossed my mind. Why does every vehicle servicing those 3 rentals have to drive across that strip behind my backyard? That question refused to leave me alone. I probably replayed it 100 times over the next couple of days while mowing the lawn, drinking coffee on the porch, even lying awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling. Every trash truck, every plumbing van, every Amazon driver cutting behind my fence to reach those rentals depended on that narrow strip of old asphalt. It wasn't a public alley. It wasn't maintained by the city. Nobody ever plowed it in winter except the property owners themselves. Yet everyone used it like it had always belonged to the neighborhood. Funny how people stop asking questions after something has existed long enough. I finally called a local surveyor named Ethan Brooks. He'd been surveying land in Fairfield County for nearly 30 years and had the kind of weathered face that made you think he'd seen every property dispute imaginable. When I explained why I wanted the survey, he chuckled softly. "Most folks call me after the lawsuit starts," he said. "You're calling before. That's usually a good sign." 3 mornings later, Ethan arrived with 2 assistants. Bright orange flags, GPS equipment that looked expensive enough to launch satellites, and a stack of county plats rolled under one arm. Vanessa's tenants watched curiously from their porches while Ethan's crew spent hours measuring fence lines, checking monuments buried decades earlier, comparing coordinates against digital county records. Around lunchtime, he walked toward me with an expression that wasn't excitement exactly, more like disbelief. "Daniel," he said quietly, "you're going to want to see this." We spread the survey across the tailgate of his truck. His finger traced a thick, black property line before stopping on the strip of asphalt behind my backyard. "This entire section," he paused, "belongs to your parcel." I stared at him. "The whole thing?" He nodded. "Every inch." "That can't be right." He smiled. "That's usually what people say." Then he opened another folder containing copies of easement records. There weren't many. He flipped through them carefully, then looked up. "Here's the interesting part." He tapped the empty space where an easement should have appeared. "There isn't one." I frowned. Meaning legally speaking. Nobody has a recorded right to cross your property to reach those rentals. My stomach tightened. "You're sure?" "I've already checked twice." Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Whoever divided these parcels decades ago either forgot to record the easement or assumed someone else already had." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because sometimes the truth sounds too ridiculous to believe. For almost 10 months, I'd been cleaning garbage dumped onto my lawn by someone whose entire rental business quietly depended on crossing land she didn't actually have permission to use. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who encouraged unnecessary legal fights. In fact, he spent the next 15 minutes explaining exactly what I shouldn't do. "Don't block it tomorrow," he warned. "Don't pour concrete barriers across it. Don't chain it off. A judge likes reasonable people. Stay reasonable." I appreciated that advice because, honestly, revenge had crossed my mind for about 3 seconds before common sense returned. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. There was a difference. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with every photo I'd taken over the past 10 months spread across the wood surface. Foam mattresses, moldy couches, construction debris, garbage bags, 42 documented dumping incidents, every cleanup receipt, every certified letter, every delivery confirmation showing Vanessa had received my complaints. I wasn't building a case out of anger anymore. I was organizing facts. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation with a real estate attorney named Rebecca Collins. She reviewed everything without interrupting once. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. "Well," she said, "I've got good news and better news." I smiled. "Let's hear the good news first. You've been remarkably patient. And the better news? Patience looks very convincing in court." She explained that because no recorded easement existed, I wasn't obligated to provide unlimited access forever. However, she also emphasized something important. "Courts don't like surprises," she said. "If your goal is to punish her, you'll lose sympathy. If your goal is to establish reasonable terms for using your property while protecting your rights, that's entirely different." That distinction became our strategy. Rebecca helps draft a formal demand package. First came reimbursement for documented cleanup costs, 42 dumping incidents at $85 each, $35, $70. Every dollar supported by receipts and photographs. Then came something Vanessa almost certainly never expected. Attached behind the reimbursement demand was a proposed private access license, 5-year renewable agreement, $500 per month, commercial vehicle weight restrictions, 10-day advance notice for major maintenance work, Immediate termination upon future property violations involving my land. Everything written professionally. Nothing emotional. No insults. No threats. Just business. Rebecca smiled after reading the final draft. This isn't a punishment, she said. It's an opportunity. We mailed the package by certified delivery on a Monday morning. Tuesday passed quietly. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I already knew who it was before answering. Mr. Mercer? The confident voice I'd imagined for months sounded strangely restrained. This is Vanessa Holloway. Good afternoon. Silence lingered for 2 seconds. I received your letter. I assumed you had. There seems to be some misunderstanding. Which part? Another pause. My property manager handles tenant instructions. I looked at the survey map lying beside me. Interesting. Excuse me. Your property manager's name doesn't appear anywhere on my deed. Silence again. Longer this time. Then she tried another direction. Surely we can discuss this informally. I tried discussing it informally twice. Remember the certified letters? More silence. I could almost hear paper shuffling. She finally sighed. What exactly do you want? I answered honestly. Respect for my property, compensation for documented damages, and clear legal terms going forward. $500 a month is excessive. Compared to what? It's just a strip of pavement. Apparently it's an important strip of pavement. Neither of us spoke after that. She ended the call by saying she'd have her attorney review everything. Rebecca laughed when I told her about the conversation. She isn't calling because she thinks she's winning, Rebecca said. She's calling because someone finally showed her numbers she can't ignore. Over the next week, activity around those rentals changed dramatically. Utility contractors postponed appointments. A roofing company called asking whether access restrictions had already begun. Apparently, word traveled fast once lawyers became involved. Even the garbage company requested clarification after hearing rumors from one of the tenants. I kept answering the same way. Nothing has changed yet. Existing access continues until legal matters are resolved. Ethan later told me that decision probably saved me from months of unnecessary litigation. Then, on the 11th day after the letter arrived, another black SUV pulled into my driveway. This one belonged to Vanessa's attorney. He stepped out carrying a leather portfolio instead of an argument. I invited him onto the porch where we'd spent nearly an hour reviewing every paragraph of the agreement. He asked thoughtful questions, suggested minor wording changes, removed nothing substantial. Finally, he closed the folder and nodded slowly. Off the record, he admitted, your documentation is exceptionally thorough. I've had 10 months to prepare it, I replied. He almost smiled. Before leaving, he extended his hand. You'll likely receive a signed agreement within 48 hours. I shook it, watching his vehicle disappear down the street, then looked across at the 3 rental houses sitting quietly beneath the afternoon sun. For the first time since all of this had started, I noticed something I hadn't felt in nearly a year. Peace, not because I'd won, not yet, but because the outcome was finally going to be decided by facts instead of arrogance. 2 mornings later, my bank notified me of an incoming wire transfer. The cleanup reimbursement had arrived in full. Less than an hour afterward, an overnight envelope landed on my porch containing a signed access agreement with Vanessa Holloway's signature, neatly placed on every required page. I thought that was the end of the story, until the first monthly inspection after the agreement went into effect revealed something hiding in plain sight that neither of us had anticipated, something that would turn an already uncomfortable arrangement into a moment the entire neighborhood would be talking about for months. The agreement officially took effect on the first day of the following month, and something interesting happened almost immediately. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no legal threats, just silence. The kind of silence that settles over a place after months of tension finally burned themselves out. Garbage stopped appearing in my yard. Not once in the first week, not once in the second. By the end of the month, the northwest corner of my lawn actually started growing back. Fresh grass replaced the muddy patch that had become a permanent reminder of someone else's carelessness. I remember standing there one Saturday morning with a garden hose in my hand, smiling over something as simple as green grass. Funny how you don't appreciate ordinary days until they've been interrupted for long enough. The first inspection under the new agreement happened exactly 30 days later. I wasn't looking for trouble. In fact, Rebecca had advised me to treat the license exactly the way any responsible property owner would. Document access, keep records, stay consistent. So I walked the asphalt strip with a clipboard, checking for damage. After several heavy delivery trucks had come through, that's when I noticed fresh tire marks cutting across the edge of my flower bed. They weren't major, maybe a foot onto the grass. But they were there. A month earlier, I probably would have shrugged and fixed it myself. This time, I simply took 3 photographs, measured the distance, and emailed the property manager with a polite notice reminding them of the vehicle boundaries outlined in Section 4 of the agreement. Less than 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was the property manager, not Vanessa. "Mr. Mercer," he said almost nervously, "I wanted to apologize personally. One of the contractors backed up farther than instructed. We'll repair everything this afternoon." And they did. By sunset, fresh soil had been spread, new sod installed, and the damaged edging replaced. Nobody argued. Nobody denied it happened. They simply honored the agreement they had signed. Harold wandered over while the crew packed up their tools. He watched them working for a minute before grinning. "You notice something?" he asked. "What's that?" "Respect always arrives the second consequences become predictable." I laughed because it sounded exactly like something he'd been saving for years. A few days later, I happened to see Vanessa again. The silver Mercedes pulled up for her monthly rent collection, just like always. But this time, she walked across the street before leaving. I honestly didn't expect that. She stopped at the edge of my walkway, glanced at the geraniums, then looked at me. "The flowers look nice," she said quietly. "My wife planted them," I answered. She nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. "I should have answered your first letter." There it was. Not a dramatic apology. Not a movie speech. Just one honest sentence. I looked at her for a second before replying. "Yeah, you probably should have." She gave a small smile that looked more tired than embarrassed. I kept thinking it would sort itself out. "Problems usually don't," I said. "They usually get more expensive." She actually laughed at that. The first genuine laugh I'd ever heard from her. "Apparently they do." She climbed back into her Mercedes and drove away, not as someone defeated, but as someone who had finally learned that ignoring people isn't the same as winning against them. Looking back now, I don't think this story was ever really about a strip of asphalt. It wasn't about $500 a month, or survey maps, or legal paperwork. It was about something a lot simpler. Every neighborhood runs on an invisible agreement. We respect each other's homes because one day we'll hope they respect ours. The moment someone decides those rules only apply to everyone else, that's usually the moment life finds a way to remind them otherwise. Sometimes that reminder comes from a judge, sometimes from a surveyor, and sometimes it's hiding beneath a piece of asphalt that's been quietly telling the truth for 50 years. The funny part is, people still ask me whether I'd do it all again. My answer is always the same. I wouldn't change the ending. But I would have hired that surveyor after the very first certified letter went unanswered. It would have saved me months of frustration, countless hours cleaning someone else's mess, and more patience than I ever wanted to test. So now I'm curious what you think. Was I right to charge for access after discovering the road legally belonged to my property? Or should I have simply let the past go once the dumping stopped? If you were in my shoes, would you have handled it differently? Or do you think respect sometimes has to come with consequences before people finally understand it? Let me know in the comments because I read every perspective, especially the ones that disagree with mine. And if you enjoy real stories where patience, documentation, and a little knowledge end up changing everything, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.